Are you a film fanatic? Well, if you are, you probably know that the Berlin International Film Festival, also known as the Berlinale, is right round the corner. It's one of the world's big three film festivals, so it's a pretty big deal. And here to give us all the insight is Euronews Culture's David Moricond. Now, David, well, thanks for being with us. I have to say I'm pretty much a massive cinema noob. I like action movies, I like superhero movies, and that's pretty much it. I hear you're a bit of a film nerd, so tell me, what is Berlinale all about?
It's an accurate description, James, and nothing wrong with liking the superhero stuff either. Look, the Berlinale is the first major film showcase, European-wise, of the year, and it is the world's largest film festival. Only this year there are 287 films being shown. So, as you said, it is a big deal. And it is one of those platforms that's absolutely amazing for upcoming filmmakers, for experimental films. And it's a festival that has never shied away from also its political leanings. So when you've had Cannes, which is known for its glitz and glamour and the red carpet and everything like that, you have Venice, which is the other main film festival in Europe, which is known as kind of the awards launch pad, the one that launches all these films to Oscar glory. The Berlinale is the cinephiles festival. There's so much going on. There's experimental stuff in the sidebars. There's stuff for younger generations with the Generations program.
I was going to ask what makes it so different from the other two, but it's just more varied than it seems.
Absolutely, yeah. And like I said, so the sidebar selections are where it all happens, really, because you do have the competition, but then you have Encounters, which is for experimental fare that wouldn't necessarily make it into competition, Forum, which is also very experimental, Panorama, which is this fantastic selection, which is very hard-hitting documentaries, queer narratives, political films, and so many others, series, there's retrospectives. I mean, it is this sprawling, borderline labyrinthine program that you just really have to get to grips with, or otherwise it shakes you a little bit too hard.
So if I'm like an aspiring filmmaker or whatever, can I submit my film to all three of the big three, or is it only to one? You know, let's say I've got my new superhero movie that I've obviously made, or Titanic 3, because I'm a massive fan of the Titanic. Can I submit it to all three, or is it just, can I just do Berlinale? How's that work?
You can submit it to all three, but obviously whether or not, if you get selected in one of them, it'll stay in that one. Now, that had to be said, Sundance films, for example, which have premiered in the US, can be eligible to premiere in Berlinale for their European premieres. So this year we will be seeing some Sundance titles which have already had their international premiere showing up in Berlin, so that European audiences can start appreciating these films.
And speaking of these titles, like, what is there to look out for this year? What are the main films to watch out for, do you think?
Oh, James, how long have you got? I'm looking at my notes here because there are so many. It's so in competition, there's a film called Disco Boy, which looks very, very promising. It's about the intertwined destinies of this man who travels across Europe to join the French Foreign Legion, and his narrative is intertwined with the narrative of a Nigerian man who is fighting oil companies which are threatening his village. And then in competition, you have other filmmakers like Christian Petzold, who's coming back with his film Roter Himmel. There's also a Sundance title, which I'm particularly looking forward to, by Celine Strong, called Past Lives, which is about two childhood friends who reconnect later on in life because their families immigrated. And from the sounds of it, it's a modern romance and something which will have us all weeping in the aisles, basically. There's also one which, Ingeborg Bachmann, Journey into the Desert, which is starring Vicky Krieps, who, I don't know if you've seen a film called Phantom Thread.
No, I have not.
Right, we'll get on that.
Right, I will do. After this.
No,
first
genuinely,
thing, yeah.
First thing after this, get on that. It is a wonderful, wonderful performer. And it's the first film in competition in Berlin by a director called Margaret von Trotter. It's her first film since 1983 in the Berlinale competition, and that looks like it's going to be really something to look out for. So the jury, led this year by Kristen Stewart, are going to have their hands full. Otherwise, well, I mean, there's so many more. There's the 100 Years of Disney Animation. They're going to do a shorts collection of all of that.
That sounds absolutely amazing.
I
right
can't
up
wait.
my street.
I cannot wait for
I'll
that.
definitely be on that, I think,
Good.
after this. Yeah.
This one you may not like. There's a film which also was in Sundance called Infinity Pool, which is this very trippy horror thriller by Brandon Cronenberg, son of David Cronenberg and all his body horror antics. There's Helen Mirren, who's playing Golda Meir in a film called Golda, which looks like it's going to be quite a transformative performance. And there's also, this year, well, the big thing is Steven Spielberg, who's going to be receiving the honorary Golden Bear, and there's going to be an homage to him for his film The Fabelmans.
But I've heard you're not a huge fan of that, right? You've been a bit of a dissenting voice.
Oh, James, yes.
I touched a nerve.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, everybody seems to be falling over backwards for this one. I thought it was saccharine and beautifully made. I mean, and because it's Steven Spielberg, of course it's beautifully made. But it's not all that. It's Oscar nominated. It has a lot of chances of like hoovering up the awards come March. But well, actually, speaking of the Oscars, there's one film that's going to be presented at the Berlinale, which is Tar, the Todd Fields film, starring Cate Blanchett. Have you seen it?
No.
Right, well, get on it. It'll change your life.
I told you I'm a massive film noob, so you know.
It's brilliant.
That's why we're having this discussion, so you can like tell me what to watch.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well then, no, genuinely go see Tar. It is an absolute masterclass of a film, also Oscar nominated. It won big at the London Critics Film Awards, and if there's any justice in the world, it will do big at the Oscars. But at the Berlinale, Cate Blanchett, Nina Hoss, and the composer of the film, Hildur Guðnadóttir, who is fantastic, she composed the score for Joker. Did you see that one?
No.
You did? Oh,
like
James.
I'm a blank canvas, David.
Okay,
this is why.
well,
this is great that you're telling me.
Good.
All this
Okay.
stuff, so.
Well, look. Prioritise Tar,
Yeah.
but her music is fantastic, and there's going to be this talk with all three of them, and I couldn't be more excited. Elsewhere, the panorama section is actually very interesting this year at the Berlinale because each year there's something of a theme, and here they've said that it's films as tools of resistance, so very leaning into that political streak that I mentioned earlier on. So there's a film by Soda Jerk called Hello Darkness, which is a collection of film clips that she's edited together in order to comment on post-Trump America. So that could be very, very interesting. There's also a documentary, a very hard-hitting one, which I've seen in advance, actually, because that was in Sundance, called Iron Butterflies. It's a Ukrainian documentary which sheds light on the truth behind what happened to the Malaysia's airline Flight 17, which was shot down by Russian forces in 2014. And it's very hard-hitting, very breathtaking, and that's really one to look out for.
I'm sure very like poignant nowadays anyway, bearing in mind what's happening. So.
Absolutely. And if I may, just one film which I really want to highlight. I mean, I haven't seen it yet, but I am giddy at the thought of seeing it. It's a film called El Eco, which is by this director called Tatiana Hueso. And her previous film premiered in Berlin in 2016. It was called Tempestad, which was this spellbinding, poetic film, which genuinely, in the 10 years that I've covered this festival, it is arguably the best thing I've seen there. And to know that she is coming back to the Berlin Film Festival with this film, El Eco, which is set in a remote Mexican city and a tale about grandmothers and granddaughters, that not much is known, but that one is definitely going to be very high up on my list.
So thinking also about the way that these films are categorised and the different awards that there are, I think you've mentioned before that some of the categories are actually gender neutral. Like, what can you tell us about that?
Right, well, a lot of festivals are going in this direction now. So since Carlo Chatrian and Mariette Riesenbeek took over the festival 3 years ago, they've shown a very keen curatorial eye. But they've also started doing these gender-neutral categories when it comes to the acting awards. So we no longer have 4 acting awards, 2 per male or female. Now there is just Best Performer and Best Supporting Performance. And I interviewed Carlo Chatrian in 2021 to ask him about this, and he said that it wasn't about erasing identities or anything like that and not celebrating what makes people individuals, but a way of opening the discussion and a way of essentially opening doors and raising awareness to it. And well, Kate Blanchett, I think even Tilda Swinton said that it was, if I'm not misquoting her, an immensely sensible decision. So quite the stamp of approval.
Pretty good.
And since then, it's the first major film festival to have done so. So quite a ballsy move. And essentially, since then, MTV, the Spirit Awards have also done away with these gender-specific acting categories. And more festivals around the world, whether it's music, whether it's film, are considering going gender neutral, which I think can only be a good thing, even if there are definitely pros and cons with regards to representation. If there are less awards, will there be less representation? What happens a year when 2 male performers wins or only 2 female performers wins? But also it does open the door and allow for more inclusivity with regards to filmmakers, actors and creatives in general who do not subscribe to those binaries and who consider themselves to be gender neutral or otherwise. And
are there any other awards or categories that kind of help to boost diversity within cinema, basically?
Well, quite a few. I mean, every side section has its own award, so that's one thing. So films that are more tailored towards children, for example, films with a queer narrative. In fact, the Berlinale is very, very well known for the Teddy Award, which is
was such a cute name.
It is. It's brilliant, isn't it? I mean, they did really well. It was Wilhelm Speck and Manfred Salzgeber who came up with it, and it's an independent jury that celebrates specifically films that have a queer narrative at their core. And otherwise, well, I mean, you know, in all forms, I mean, it's a festival that is open to all cinematic forms, whether it's documentaries, shorts, and everything like that. There is really something for everyone. And this year in particular, there is a focus on Ukraine, because the festival has been very open with the fact that it stands in solidarity with the Ukrainian people. And like I said, Panorama is using it as a platform to talk about films as a tools for resistance. And this year, their screening is a special screening, the Sean Penn and Aaron Kaufman documentary, Superpower, which is an interesting title, but basically it's a documentary about how Sean Penn was in Ukraine and his interviews and meetings with President Zelensky. So that will be a very interesting one to see. One other thing with regards to inclusivity is the fact that this year, I mean, the Berlinale have always been very, very transparent when it comes to gender, when it comes to essentially saying how many, there was a pact, a document that was signed by major film festivals promising inclusivity and a 50-50 split by 2020. That hasn't happened. But the Berlinale is quite unique in the fact that it is leading the charge when it comes to female representation as directors for films. So this year, in the 18 films in competition, you have 6 films directed by female filmmakers, 9 by male, and 3 by non-binary. So we are edging towards more inclusivity, more diversity, and something which Cannes, for example, or Venice can only dream of, because in past years, there just the numbers haven't been there. And what's great about the Berlinale is that they really strive to kind of give a voice to filmmakers, whether they are established filmmakers or up-and-coming filmmakers. They really are putting their money where their mouth is.
And that's great, because often you think of cinema, or especially these kind of film festivals, very highbrow, so the fact that they make it so much more accessible to people, so much more diverse, can only be a good thing. Absolutely, and the Berlinale also is renowned for it being a public festival. So you have film critics like myself who go there with their press accreditation, and we have press screenings in the morning to see all these films and so on and so forth. But in the afternoon, every member of the public can just buy a ticket and just go in. Try finding that in Cannes. Try finding that in other film festivals where it has to be said, a little bit elitist. And Berlin really kind of opens its doors to make sure that the majority of the people can see as many films as possible. Now, I have to ask about the awards themselves. Is the Golden Bear actually gold?
I hate to disappoint you, James. It's not.
Oh,
it's not golden. I know.
So
I know.
you couldn't like sell it for a pretty price. Not that you'd want to,
I mean,
of course. You
wouldn't. I mean, that one goes on the shelf with the best of them.
Yeah.
No, the bear is actually made of bronze, and then it is plated in gold, and then you have the silver bears as well. And the golden bear, if I'm not mistaken, it weighs 4 kilos. So I mean, still quite hefty.
You could do a bit of damage with that.
Right, exactly. Just like, but not that you'd want to.
No,
but
exactly.
still,
You
again,
respect it and put it on the shelf where it belongs.
Right,
pride
and
of place.
Exactly, polish it from time to time. But no, I'm trying to think of other kind of factoids I can give you about bear. Actually, do you know what? There is one filmmaker who has won the Golden Bear twice, and it's only happened once. Do you know who it is?
No idea.
Okay, but you said that you were a noob, so sorry, exactly. I shouldn't have asked that question.
I like to think I'm the voice of the audience, so it's not just me that doesn't know anything. There are other people out there.
Fair enough. Well, it's the filmmaker Ang Lee. He won in 1993 and 1996 for The Wedding Banquet and Sense and Sensibility, and to this date, he's the only filmmaker who has won the Golden Bear twice. So there we go.
There we go. Well, great, David. Thanks for chatting with us. And I'll definitely check out all those films you mentioned before. And have a great time.
Thank you very much.